you've got to start thinking like your enemy, and you start thinking like, well, how are they going to get into my network? You know, it's going to take you a few of those things. And then I'll look at defending like a ninja, or defending like a ninja the Cisco way. So I'll take you through some of the Cisco things that we do. You should point out that no one company is ever going to be perfect when it comes to cybersecurity. So at least at Cisco, we look primarily at the network as our main area of defence. You really need to be across all elements of the stack, from end user protection all the way down to the network and physical security, as well as your policy and plans, to have a complete security architecture for what you're going to do on your networks. So cyber is more than just the internet. A lot of people think that I'm talking about cyber, so I'm talking about what I do when I bring up a browser. Cyber is really anything where you have some sort of electronic information. Now that could actually be what we term it as at rest. So if you've got a hard drive in a computer that's in a sensitive computer that you've got not attached to a network, it's actually part of cyberspace. It's part of what's classified as a cyber piece of the cyber puzzle, because you need to protect it. Even though it's not connected to a network, it can still be infiltrated, as we'll show in a couple of the great examples over the next month about some of the issues. And this includes things like, particularly these days, where we're going from what we call the non-kinetic to the kinetic world. So where we go from pure digital space into physical space, and the SCADA networks are a great example of this. So if I had a computer malware that was able to, say, control a process control system, such as a power grid, or let's say a nuclear enrichment facility, then I'm now crossing the barrier from an electronic system, from a digital world into a physical world. And this is probably the most scariest part of cybersecurity as we go forward, is that we're now seeing these sorts of infiltrations into networks. And in my defence lecture that's coming up on February 13th, I'll actually look at one of the greatest recent break-ins, which is the Stuxnet and Duqu malwares, which are just fantastic case studies of how to write really good malware that's very hard to detect, but it crosses that boundary of electronic into the physical realm. So if cyber is everything that contains electrical information, electronic information, then cyberspace is really then all forms of activity that happen with that sort of information. Okay, so and that includes all our networks, and that includes the internet, it includes private networks, and also networks that are disconnected. So therefore, it follows that cybersecurity is protection of this cyberspace. And what we're talking about today is really just a few basic elements of that cybersecurity. When you choose to start, say, your first training in cybersecurity, you'll definitely come across what we call the CIA triad, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That's probably a very well-known triad, and certainly you'll come across it in any of the Cisco courses on security. It also includes, though, the exploitation of cyberspace. So you need to be very proactive in cybersecurity. It's no good just being sitting back as a network security expert just watching the logs. You need to be very proactive on how you actually protect your network, and how you can install these countermeasures on the network to sort of intervene with the adversaries actually getting onto your network in the first place. So who are we up against? There's no real single definition for what a hacker is, and what sort of profile would be behind a hacker. You'd never see one walking down the street, or a person walking down the street, and know that they're a hacker. And this is the real hard thing about when we get into cybercrime, and you'll have a great lecture about cybercrime in the next month. But unlike real criminals, hackers love the anonymity that the internet gives them, so they can hide behind anything. They hide behind a name, hide behind these pseudonyms that they use on the net. But what we find with the hacktivists, such as groups like Lulzsec and Anonymous, not even the whole group know who each other, the real identity of the other members of the group. They work together for a particular aim, but their identity is largely kept private. So it's very hard to track people down. The threat spectrum of our cyber adversaries really goes from top to bottom here. So the biggest threat, and the number one threat really, is from state-sponsored cyber operations. Now these include governments and large corporations who actively pursue their competition, whether that be another nation, whether it be another corporation as part of that nation, to really elicit confidential information and use that information. Probably aware that the greatest threat to most of corporations around the world at the moment in terms of state-sponsored cyber operations is really China. China is leading the way in this particular area at the moment. In fact, one of the greatest breaches that has been documented in the last 3 months was the US Department of Commerce. Their network was so infiltrated by Chinese that one of their printers actually started printing a Chinese print job. So the hackers had actually were so blasé about the infiltration that they sent a print job to the wrong printer, which is the printer in the US Department of Commerce. So it's a common thought among security professionals that if you are doing business with China, it's pretty well assured that your network is either under attack or has already been infiltrated by the Chinese government. They want to know what you're doing. They want to know the inside information. Now, they're not the only ones. There are many countries that practice cyber operations to better their own companies, to better their own position in the world. So China is just leading the way. There are many other people who do that, many other countries that do that. Probably the most frightening ones are the next group, which is the hacktivists. These are the ideologues who, with nothing better to do, would like to attack various sites for a particular reason. Now, we've seen that recently in the last week with the US SOPA legislation going through Congress, how the group Anonymous attacked FBI and many government sites, brought them down, and are able to do that really quite easily and quickly. So we see a lot of these sort of hacktivism groups sort of popping up now. And the case study I'm going to use today in this presentation, it actually looks at one of these hacktivist groups, the Anonymous group, and what they've done and how they actually operate. Thirdly, we have the profit-motivated groups, and we've got a lecture later in the month on criminal motivated cyber threat. But really, these are the ones who want to get money out of you, and they use a number of different threat vectors to get into your system. So whether they just break in and get information, or they put malware on individual devices, use your computer as an attack against somebody else. A lot of different things there. And then we have the last level, which is our personal gain, or people who do something just to say, look what I can do. With cyber security or information security 30 years ago when I got started, the last group is probably the most prevalent in this field. People were hacking just to show other people what they could do. The other top three groups really weren't on the scene, and they've really grown in the last 30 years, particularly since everyone's now connected to the internet. It's much easier to get a threat vector and to infiltrate different systems that are connected to the net. And people are connecting a lot more information, a lot more systems to the internet, and are not doing it in a secure way, and are allowing a lot of these security holes to appear. We can actually define what we call a threat economy, where we have, on the left, people who actually develop the threats, develop these sort of worms, spyware, malware. Then we see the middlemen, the people who are able to sell those wares to other people and produce, monetize the sort of that capability, and then hit the end user. So there's a different number of end values that they're after, but really you follow the money, you find out where these sort of things are all happening. As a good example, in Russia, there's a botnet site. There's a number of botnet sites that you can, if you wanted to become an overnight master criminal, you just go to that site, you hire a botnet, get them to install your malware on as many nodes as you can afford to pay for, and then you just sit back and enjoy the revenue coming in. So these sorts of things are real, and a lot of these are quite frightening because they're hard to stop, and it doesn't take long on the net to find a number of these people who are selling 10,000 plus botnets to do the work of a criminal for you. So let's get on to thinking like a hacker. So really, if we're looking at the top three threats, so we're looking at our state-sponsored and criminal organisations and largely our ideologues. For them to be a hacker, they really want to be able to get into a system and get out. And the best hacker is one that is not actually discovered. So if you can infiltrate a system, do what you want to do, extract the information you want, and then leave and cover your tracks, that's what we call sort of the perfect hack. If that's what you wanted to do. There's a lot of other less sophisticated attacks that we're seeing, particularly in the criminal world, where they go and hire a botnet and essentially hold for ransom a company to take in their website. Recently, I was involved with Cisco. We had a company here in Australia which was had exactly that. So they had a ransom that was sent to them. A botnet was launched from Estonia at that corporation. Very effective. And there's not a lot you can do about these things because you've got these botnets that have come from all around the world, so it's very hard to just put simple blocks on firewalls and things like that. These things occur from multiple sources around the globe. But luckily in this case, all the botnet came out of the Eastern Bloc, and so they were able to block that traffic. But this is a very, very common criminal activity when they can hire botnets and hold people for ransom. So the first step in thinking like a hacker is reconnaissance. Now, hackers are very patient and they're very clever people. So what they will do before they go into a site, they will get as much information as they can that they think they can use against you. And surprisingly enough, a lot of businesses and a lot of corporations publish far too much information on their own corporate website. This includes email addresses and usernames and things like that, things that you could probably use to gain access to the system at a later date. Also, one other popular one is social engineering. So, meeting people and using the weakest link in our security chain, which is the person, to gain information that probably wouldn't be easily obtained through any other means. We should say that social engineering has turned a new phase. So if we're seeing now that sites like Facebook and those sort of sites are just a goldmine for criminal hackers to farm Facebook and look for information that you may have accidentally put up there, but they can use that information against you. So I would warn anybody who uses Facebook to ensure that information you put up there is kept fairly innocuous and can't be used against you. So Google hacking is also a good one, and I've just got a quick demonstration of that right now. So I pull up a search page on my browser, and what I'm doing is I'm actually using Google to do the work for me. So I'm the hacker, and what I want to do is look for sites where perhaps they've been a naive or lazy programmer and they haven't really, they might have left a password file, a people list file out that one of the web crawlers has picked up. So I've just used Google, see if there's a people list file, and sure enough, there's a etc. password that's being picked up by Google. I can then look at that, go and have a look, grab a password file, and then let's see if I can break the passwords using some sort of hash collision technique, rainbow table, that sort of thing. I'll get onto passwords a bit later. But I'm using Google to do all that sort of reconnaissance for me, so I can go and find these sites. Google hacking is a very common tool used by the hackers. I just showed you a very simple one. But what about this one? This is an actual real Google search, and it's one that's recommended by a couple of the hack sites in Russia. So what I'm asking for here, I'm saying to Google, I want you to find me all the documents that have some sort of, so these are the doc PDF files, etc., that have confidential in the actual document itself. Things like budgets, those sorts of things. I could extend this. Interesting, if you run this, you see there's so many hits, it's just unbelievable. I haven't run this on the slide deck here. I'll leave that for some homework for you to have a go at. So if you put this into a Google search engine, you'll find so many different PDF files of confidential salary gradings with people's names and all these sorts of things. So it just makes it a hell of a lot easier for a hacker to find out about the site and this sort of information. I put this up as an example of a very good social engineering exercise that one of the guy called Jim Stickley, he's a professional social engineer. He sells his services to companies just to prove that social engineering allows him so much access to sites. So this guy and his outsider, they posed as firemen, went into a bank and claimed to do a fire safety survey of the bank. So they were led into the bank, they were showed all the systems. While he was going around, his offsider attached keyboard loggers. They wrote down, because as you know, people put passwords on post-it notes on their screens. They were able to take down passwords, usernames. They left the bank and came back and were able to show to the bank how much information they were able to steal just from a simple social engineering activity. So if you're working in a very sensitive field, and we see this all the time in our mining industry, particularly in Australia, where you're overseas and you're approached or tried to be picked up by somebody or someone starts a conversation, just be aware that they may not be who they seem they seem to be. And it's very easy to use social engineering to get additional information about a particular company or the target they're after. So then we go to scanning and enumeration. This is really sort of old school. This is where we are trying to work out, well, okay, I've identified my target. Now I want to see what's open. What ports can I get into? What sort of vulnerabilities have they got at the network layer to get into this particular system? Now, luckily, we have very good security devices now that pick up a lot of this. So our firewalls and our intrusion detection prevention systems will light up like a Christmas tree if somebody is doing full port scans on a particular system. But what if I had a piece of malware that I was able to get on the inside of the firewall? What if someone had, through some sort of drive-by attack, I was able to put a bit of malware on somebody inside the system where the IDS is not normally placed. So the IDSs are normally placed towards the edge of the network for people coming in. But if I'm already inside, I've got a nice bit of malware, and I can then start looking for vulnerabilities in the network that generally aren't picked up by any IDS, IPS, or firewall. So I'm on a trusted system. And what they do, the hacking techniques here is that rather than use, the old, I'll just scan all the computers on this network and leave a great big trace if anyone's listening for this sort of ping sweep. They're very patient. So I've got a bit of malware. Rather than scan all my devices in the next minute, what I might do is just to scan one device every 5 minutes. I've got a lot of time. I don't care. These things aren't picked up by any IDS. It's very innocuous. It's so low level it won't trip any threshold. So I'll just check a host every couple of minutes, and I won't be using ICMP. What I'm going to use is one of the other flags in the TCP. So ICMP is an easy one to pick up. So I've just got a diagram here of the three-way handshake of TCP, the SYN, SYN-ACK, ACK, which is very common for you guys doing networking on their call. Most of the denial of service attacks, they will employ something what they call a half-open SYN attack. So they'll do a SYN, the end host will do a SYN-ACK, but they won't ACK, so the port's left open. The theory behind that is that if I do enough of these sort of half-open SYN attacks, I'll use the resources of that end device, and they won't be able to answer any other networks. It's a very simple and very effective attack. But it's also very picked up quite easily, even by host-based IDSs and host-based firewalls. So what we see hackers doing is playing around with these TCP flags in the TCP headers. So rather than actually using SYN and ACK, they'll use something like the SYN flag or a push flag, and they won't let the others, won't set the other flags, because I can just use a SYN flag and I can still use that to see if a port is open on a particular system. I won't get any response, and that tells me that it's open. If I get someone comes back and says it's reset, then I know that that port's closed. So I can use what they're calling this stealth mode to actually look around the network and find other ports. So I get a bit of malware on the inside, then I use these sort of stealth mode enumeration attacks to work out, well, what's open, what's available, those sorts of things. And these things are rarely picked up by your internal security devices. Okay, so all your external armor and all that is your firewalls placed at the edge are picking these things up. So if I'm on the outside trying to break in with a brute force attack, I'm going to be picked up by your firewall and your IDS. But if I'm on the inside, it's a different story. And if we look at scanning and enumeration from the web side of things, so we've looked at the networking side of looking at what ports are open and what hosts might be available and other vulnerabilities. The biggest vulnerability by far is the end user on the web, on a web browser. So hackers will look at what website and application vulnerabilities they can find just simply by the web. And really the two outstanding hacks that we're seeing are two attacks called SQL injection and cross-site scripting. At the moment, these make up about 30% of all attacks on the end user device. And they completely bypass your firewall and IDS. I mean, people say, well, I've got an IDS or an IPS that's going to pick up an SQL injection attack. It's very difficult to do that because the IPS signatures, IPS are based on a signature-based security methodology which look for specific signatures. And with SQL injection, it's very, very easy to change the signature and use different signatures to do the same thing. And the IPS signature database is always catching up to where what's happening at the user space here, the web. A number of other attacks. The most, I guess, frightening for a security professional is the 0 day. The 0 day just simply means this is an unpatched vulnerability in a bit of web code or a bit of software and operating system. And why it's so frightening is because we just don't know it exists. We don't know it exists until somebody tells us it's there. When you look at an application like Windows XP and Windows 7, these are millions of lines of code with thousands of libraries, and you can guarantee there are still an untapped number of 0 day faults in the operating system, in the browser, in things like Adobe Acrobat, Adobe Flash. All these things have faults in them that we don't even know about, and they're probably the most scariest things that are around at the moment. Best defense against these sort of attacking is we have some really great web application and email application firewalls. So these are things that I've got my networking firewalls, but I also need some sort of application firewall to guard against them. And these will remove 90% of the SQL injections that you see. As I say, no product is perfect for this, and you can always get around something, and the hacker is always one step ahead. Endpoint protection is very important, and also primarily user education, just warning the user that these sorts of things can happen, and when to show caution about going to particular websites. I just want to show you, this is the sort of a breakdown of current threats that people, that one of the website monitors are picking up at the moment. It was, as you can see, SQL injection and cross-site scripting make up the majority, but there are just so many others, other attacks, other threats that are happening on the web. And this is a bit worrying. There are about 19% of unknown, so these things are coming in. We don't know there's a signature, we don't know what to call them, we don't know what they are, but there's just a large number of threats. So we are definitely not on top of this by any stretch of the imagination. So I want to take you to a quick SQL injection demonstration here, because wherever I go, a lot of people ask, well, what does it mean, SQL injection? It sounds very technical, but it actually isn't. It's actually probably one of the easiest hacks around, and it's just unbelievable. It's still possible to do this today. And it all centers around the fact that people writing back-end database applications don't do any parameter filtering when they take the filter off the website, when they take the parameters from the website. So they just feed it straight back into a SQL query. So in this particular demo, what I'm doing is looking for a page that I know is going to do some sort of SQL query like this. So I want to break into a page that it's just doing a simple selecting all from users, where username is John and password is whatever. And these are two variables that have been passed through the GET or a POST from a website. So let's say I come to a company login page and I use my reconnaissance to work out, well, I definitely know that there's a user called John and I want to break into this page. And I can use a password that I can guess, so I can just do a brute force attack if I want and try and get into that page. But that's really hard. It takes a long time to do that, and you generally get sick of that sort of thing. You could probably write your own bot to do it, but the easier way to do it is do something like this. So rather than enter the guy's name, I add a few more things to his username field here. So, and I don't have to put any password in at all, and magically I can log in as John. And the reason why that works is because what I've done is I've kind of finished off the SQL statement and made it true in all cases for when user is John. I don't really care about the password, and that's allowed me to log in as that person, because the website developer of that site has not done any parameter filtering whatsoever, and just placed that directly into an SQL caller. Now, these are really, really dangerous, because if you find a site, or if a hacker finds a site that's got a weakness or a vulnerability with their SQL backend database, they can do anything they want. They can drop tables, they can add tables, they can get a list of a table, they can look at other tables, find out the whole database structure, and that's generally what the most attacks we're seeing today. Anonymous, their favourite attack is this SQL injection. So once we're in, we've gained access to the system through some poor user or some poor programming. What I want to do now is hack some passwords, and I want to look at a couple of hashes, because we're probably all aware computer systems, when they store passwords, they generally store them as a hash. And the most popular one around in the past has been a hash called MD5. The old versions of XP and earlier versions of NT used an NTLM, which is actually an MD4 type hash, which is even less secure. And unfortunately, Cisco routers still use MD5 as its hash for its passwords as well. If you do service password encryption, it'll show that as a MD5 hash. MD5 is largely broken. And in fact, there's no security agency in the world now that recommends using MD5 for anything. They're recommending SHA-2 as a minimum for any hashing algorithms. I'll show you why very soon. Okay, we'll just take a quick look at passwords and why they're so important Okay, so a couple of years ago there was a website called RockU, and through an SQL injection flaw in their database, a hacker was able to get in and pull down the entire user database of 32 million users. And not only was the application developer who wrote the site bad with his parameter checking, he was also bad with storing the information. So all the passwords are actually stored in the clear. So he gained access to all 32 million accounts and their passwords in the clear. And it was only that he decided to publish that and show how wrong, how bad the RockU site was, you know, that they didn't actually use that against the people who actually registered. Because what we're finding is that generally people use the same password for a number of sites. And the hacker here, luckily, he decided just to out the RockU website and show them how bad they were, and they were able to bring it down, and hopefully people changed their passwords who were on that site. But interestingly, the top 10 passwords that they noticed from those 32 million were these. And I don't want to hold the poll here today on WebEx, but I can guarantee there are a number of you here listening in who probably use one of these passwords already. And you probably use these passwords more than once. So you probably use it for your Twitter account, perhaps, and your Facebook account, and maybe some other account, your email account. And which opens up this issue that if someone breaks your password once, they will use it again. They will try and use it in other places. So it's a good idea to not have the same password, particularly for a lot of your social media sites, unless you want to have them owned by somebody else. So a hacker will use this knowledge that they have about these default usernames and passwords, and then the top 10 use, and start with those when they're trying to break into an account. This default username and password, this first one here, actually applies to things like Linksys access points or Cisco routers. When you first buy one, they have a default password. So Linksys is admin and admin. Cisco routers used to be Cisco login. Same for every other consumer electric device that has network access. You'll generally find there will be default usernames and passwords. And unfortunately, most people don't change those. So if you're driving down the road and you find an access point that's open, chances are that it will also be using the default username and password to get into that access point. So it's a very important security lesson to change those default passwords, because they're the first things that people look like. Other methods for cracking passwords, unfortunately for us, our computing power is doubling every year, and the hackers have found a really great ways of hacking into our hash passwords. And what we're doing and how we're extending our GPUs, our graphics processing units, so all these fantastic 3D graphics cards that we're using these days to play these games, are also turning out to be very good number crunchers for breaking into passwords. So what we're seeing is that, you know, like here I got a single GTX NVIDIA card, take less than 5 days to crack a password using a 69-character key space. The GPUs are increasing again, so they're like the normal CPUs. So they double in processing power almost every year as well. So as an example, this is why MD5 is a bad choice for password hashing. GTX 295 card can break almost 1.4 billion passwords, or can brute force attack at 1.4 billion passwords a second, which is a frightening number. What does that mean? Well, it also means that we can join these things together in a distributed hash attack. So just take note of this number here. If I'm salting an MD5 password, those of you who don't know what salting means, you'll have to enroll in the CCNA security course or the CC entry course in security. They'll teach you all about it. But it's a more secure way of doing MD5. So I can break, say, 1 million hashes per second with a salted MD5, or if a standard MD5, I've got 2.5 billion hashes per second I can do with this sort of distributed hash. And this is old, okay? So these are older cards. The latest generation, you can double this again. Next year you can double it again. But like I said before, MD5 is basically insecure. If you're using any form of hashing algorithms in your own systems, you would be better off using a SHA-based, SHA-2-based system than MD5. So what does this all mean? It all comes down to what we call password entropy. Now, entropy is a term we use that specifies the amount of randomness in the password. So if I'm just using, and it comes from Shannon's information theorem, it's basically log to the available character space, right? So if I'm just using a character pool of digits, so I've got 0 to 9, it works out that there's an entropy there of about 3.32 bits per character. So if I've got an 8-character password, so I've just used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like all the people on the computing website. It's going to take less than a second to crack that password using, even if it was hashed and salted with MD5, using those distributed password hashing cracking methods. So even if I move up and start using lowercase letters only in my password, it's still going to take 58 seconds to break that password. That's why it's important. You see people or sites you go to continually ask for you to have 8-digit character passwords which have upper lowercase, a digit, and a special character, because as you can see, it's an exponential. Makes an exponential difference in cracking these passwords. So if I've got a full 94 character pool to work from, 8 character password salted MD5 at 1 million hashes per second, I'm just going to take 200 years to break that password, theoretically. So that's why it's always worthwhile to use those sorts of traits in your password. If you've got a very simple password, it doesn't take very long to break. If you're not using a salted MD5, you're just using a straight MD5, you're on an older XP or an NT system, that you just use an NTLM type hash, then multiply that or divide that by 2500. So your 8-digit password here will be broken in under an hour instead of 6 years. So that's the sort of quantum, the exponential leap you're seeing in this password breaking, and this is only getting better year after year. One point, and this is made well by the XKCD guys who write these cartoons. It's not necessarily the complexity, a short, complex password that's very hard for you to remember. In general, a longer password will also be very, very secure. So if you've got a passphrase that you can easily remember, you can get away with using upper and lower case letters and be far more secure than somebody using some password using all these letters, because it's very hard. Something that's very hard for humans to remember, but easy to break. That's the point he's making in the cartoon. So if you've got a passphrase, they're actually much harder to break in the hashing, even with MD5. So I want to take you through a quick case study here. And the one I'll use here is HB Gary Federal. This was last year. HB Gary Federal is a security firm, and they were trying to drum up business for their company with the intelligence community in the US. And the CEO was doing some research, and he believed that he could uncover the identities of the anonymous group just by using his sort of method of looking at Facebook and looking at associations in Facebook. So he was doing some Facebook trawling, some social engineering around Facebook, and he reckoned he could uncover the identities of the anonymous group. he couldn't. It was a total fallacy. But he made the claim, and he made it publicly. And unfortunately, it upset a number of the anonymous groups. And a good point here to take away is that if you're going publicly against a hacking group, you better be sure that you can withstand their assault on your website. And this firm was an actual security firm. But it turned out that their website was horribly insecure. They had a lot of vulnerabilities in their content management system, which allowed Anonymous to access via a simple SQL injection. And they were able to pull off all the employee usernames and passwords, basically using that same method that I just gave you a demo on before. They were able to break in and pull down the whole user database. They were using an earlier version of MySQL, which used a not so very good password hashing algorithm, and they were able to break the passwords quite easily. So there they had the whole site, the whole employees, and the passwords quickly cracked. From what they cracked, they were able to pull out the chief operating officer's password, and they discovered that he reused that in other accounts like his Twitter and LinkedIn accounts. So they hijacked those, took them over. They also found that the company server was there, also used the same password. So the COO used the same passwords in a number of places. They're able to break in there and delete files, shut down computers, delete backups, things like that. Just wreak general mayhem. Remember, this is a security firm. This is a firm that advertises itself as being a leader in network security, leader in endpoint security, at least anyway. So once they had the CEO's password, they also decided to have a look around with that, and they discovered that he used the same password for his Google Apps account for the company. And so they were able to get into that. They were able to grab all the emails, 60,000 emails to the companies, and they published them online. So imagine if you're a security company and suddenly all the emails that you thought were confidential between them were suddenly published online. So they start to lose face a bit by this attack. And in the end, the co-founder, so HB Gary Federal has a parent company called HB Gary. The co-founder's email account was also compromised, and the parent company's website was also defaced. Now, as I said there, it was probably the worst time because they were trying to restructure the company and sell it. They had a number of buyers for the HB Gary Federal at the time, but all of them all walked, and so HB Gary Federal no longer exists, and it doesn't exist anymore because Anonymous, the hacktivist hacking group, decided to pursue the company, and they basically brought it to its knees and destroyed it. So HB Gary Federal no longer exists. You can still find the HB Gary website. They make no mention of this attack, which is funnily enough, but there's plenty of it written on Wikipedia and whatnot, and you can have a look at it for yourselves. So I encourage you to have a look at how not to threaten the anonymous hacktivist group in public. It's a very good case study for that. So how do we defend now? Now that you see, and again, I've only scratched the surface on what hackers are capable of and what they can do. But now we're looking at, well, how do I defend against a hacker? And from a Cisco point of view, we have a sort of a mindset where we look at trust, visibility, and resilience, where the idea is that we need to be able to trust the network and the end users that attach to that network. We need full visibility of what's happening so we can detect any attack. And we need resilience. We need to respond to it, and we need to be able to recover. We need a plan B if our whole network has gone down. We need some sort of continuity of operations. So this is the sort of thing that you'll be entering into as you progress along your training in the Cisco networking academies and things like that along our our sort of approach to this. So it's really about the who, what, where, when, and why of that attacker. So with my trust, I really want to know who's on my network and what devices on my network. So I'm using things like my identity and access control. I'm using things like identity-based network security and these sort of things with our new technologies like TrustSec and those sorts of things. We can now start to discern between a user who is, say, a user at their desktop and somebody who is VPNing in from, say, a wireless hotspot at the local cafe or local McDonald's. And I want to be able to give those two types of modes of access to my networks a different access. So I want to be able to say, well, if you're at your desktop, I want to be able to give you better access than someone who's, say, VPNing in from a public network. And those sorts of things are absolutely are possible to do these days with things like TrustSec. And we also look at, we must do physical security and audit and compliance checking on our networks. It's no good for us to build a network and then say, well, that's it. It's always good practice to have a physical security checklist, make sure that your servers are secure, make sure your equipment is secure, and have it regularly audited and be compliant to whatever standards you have in your particular country or region. So then we look at the visibility options. So we want to know what threats are present and where they are and how do we take action. So this is where we're looking at continuous monitoring of the network. It's very hard to monitor everything. There are a lot of things, there are a lot of signatures that give false positives, and we have to make sure that we can look at what will work and what doesn't work in your particular area. You need to know what data is leaving your network. Data exfiltration is a very key problem these days, particularly to the email system. So knowing what information is being sent out and having some sort of email firewall to make sure that sensitive information isn't leaving the company accidentally or on purpose. Looking at what malware and advanced persistent threat sort of defenses you might have as well in the visibility. So then we look at how do we avoid disruption and how do we mitigate this risk. How do we get back to trust our network, and that's all our resilience side of the house. So looking at our continuity operations, incident handling, and how do we mop up after an attack. Always good to document the process and procedures that you have, and after you've had an attack, or if you've sensed a intrusion into your system, it's always good to document, write it up, and so you can learn from those mistakes, and so you don't sort of go down and that sort of thing happen to you again. So in terms of Cisco, we have quite a broad set of technologies and products that cover these areas of trust, visibility, and resilience. And as you sort of progress through your training from new entry-level security right up to professional and expert-level security, you'll come across all these sort of devices. So even in your network associate level, you will come across a lot of the VPN and access control devices, and learn how to use them and learn how to put them in a network and where to put them in the network. So it's a great series of qualifications to go through from entry to associate to professional to expert if you want to pursue that. And it all starts with the first step. So I encourage everybody, if you haven't already started, to go to the Learning Network, cisco.com, and have a look at all the courses that we have in the security stream and see which ones you find interesting and which ones you can follow. And I certainly started my career a long time ago with CCNA, so it's a very good qualification to start with and to work on. Very easy these days to take a course and online or through a provider and pass that qualification and move on. And that's really my presentation for today, so thanks very much. Please fill out your feedback forms and join me on Facebook if you have any questions. Thanks very much.